Hello again, and welcome to this podcast series. We're on episode number 11. And with the basic foundation of seeing God as a servant of servants, the greatest servant of all, the greatest being of all, we've been talking about the fruits of servanthood. And so today we're going to talk about a lesson entitled Influence Multiplied. You know, since our text comes out of Matthew 20 and the parallels, as Jesus is talking to the apostles who were leaders, since he was talking to leaders, I'll make an application here and ask a question. Which kind of leaders do you remember the longest? What type of leaders? You know, as I answered the question myself, I said I remember the ones who were harsh or the ones who were servants. Those are the ones that I remember. Both types have increased my prayer life. Thanking God for the ones who are servants and the impact they've had on my life, and then praying for the others that they will either repent or God will take them out of leadership. That's a very simple prayer. I've prayed it thousands of times probably, because there are some people that are not going to serve. They want to be served, and they should not be leaders. I think back to my life turning around from not wanting anything to do with God to getting so turned on to God that I wanted to become a preacher, and did. But it was a leader, a preacher, that turned me around. He served me in so many ways. I thank God for him often, and he's been dead for years, but I thank God for him often because God used him as a vessel to change my life. It was incredible. But he was a servant. He would do anything. I was his project. And I think out of love. I believe he loved me deeply and just wanted to serve, and he changed my life. And then the first full-time ministry I was in, I worked with a guy 20 years older than I was. And he was a motivational speaker. At one time, he had done that for a living, just done motivational speeches. But anyway, he was back into the preaching business when I knew him, and he trained me. He gave me everything he had. He held nothing back. He was a very close personal friend. We remained that even after I moved far away to a distant place to serve. We would go back on vacation to visit because we were very good friends. He had served me. And I've never forgotten that, and I've never stopped appreciating him. And basically, those are the kinds we remember. We do, unfortunately, remember the harsh ones. We need to give that up, by the way. I don't have any emotional feeling at all connected with those who were harsh. I have no bitterness. That stuff will kill you. So even the ones that were harsh that you tend to remember a long time, give up the bitterness, okay? And pray for them. They need your prayers. But the ones that were servants, those I'm grateful for. They have changed my life. When we think about serving people, it's interesting that in almost every list of basic human needs, you'll find acts of service as one of those things, one of your love languages. In that book, for sure, it's in there. And acts of service have always been on my list. They are one of those needs or one of those things that I appreciated. They're certainly a love language to me. If you serve me, I'm going to love you, and you can't stop me from doing it. I appreciate it so much. It touches a special nerve for me. And I can tell you for sure that those of you who prayed for me when I found out I had cancer, until the time I ended up in the hospital in reaction to the chemo and thought I could die, all of those prayers were appreciated so much. The way I do quiet times in the morning right now, I've varied it a lot during the years. I read my Bible at night now. I started reading my Bible before I go to bed, quite a long time actually. I'm reading through the New Testament once a month. So I read quite a while at night before I go to bed, or while I'm in bed actually, to be accurate. But in the mornings, I start off journaling my prayers to God. I'm more expressive. I get more in touch with my feelings. Everything's better if I journal it because I'm a writer. And so I do it on the computer. But then I have this long prayer list with all kinds of categories of people that need prayers. And at the very top of the page, I have my prayers for those who prayed for me over my cancer and my illness issues. And I think God answered the prayers and kept me alive. And so what you've done for me is so special. I was in a teaching hospital. The largest medical school in Texas is a part of that campus where the hospital is. And so I had all kinds of doctors, all kinds of specialists coming in during my 23-day stay in the hospital. And I told them at any hour of the day or night, there are people somewhere in the world praying for me. Maybe hundreds, maybe thousands. But there were people praying for me, and I want you to know how much that meant. And I think that's a part of why this week, this will be old news by the time you see this podcast, but only this week, a few days ago, I was given the all clear sign from the oncologist that the cancer is gone. Now, will it come back? I don't know. I am not worried about it at all. I'm just grateful that it's gone. But your prayers were a big part of that. You have been my servants. You have served me. And I want you to know how much that means to me. I start my prayers off every morning praying for you, that God will bless you because you've served me. And I pray that your life goes well, and He does bless what you're doing. I did find out this week that everything was good, and I'm grateful for that. But if we would look at basic human needs, we have a need to be appreciated, don't we? We have a need to be approved. We have a need to be accepted. All of us have that. And I'll tell you, the shortcut to having that need met is for you to be a servant, for us to be servants of others. When we do that, people appreciate it. They accept us. They love us. It's amazing the reaction. I made the statement in one of these episodes that you can't outgive God. You can give all you want, but you can't outgive Him. He'll bless you somehow for your giving. And so when we love and serve other people, rest assured, it is going to come back your way. And so if you want to be approved and accepted and all of that, and you do because you're human, then be a servant, and it's going to come back to you. There are many ways to serve. The Bible talks a lot about serving the poor. Most of us need to do a better job at that one. There's so much in the Bible about it. As I'm reading through the Bible so often now, the New Testament, the emphasis is clearly there all the way through. But then I think about, to me, surely the greatest way to serve any human being is to help them come to know God. Recently, there was a huge international conference held at Orlando that I was scheduled to be at and to speak at. But at that point, I didn't know if I still had the cancer or not. My wife has lung issues, and so we decided not to go. But I watched a lot of it virtually on live stream, and then it was recorded, and you could watch it real quickly after it was recorded. It was a great electronic arrangement that they had, and those lessons are available to all of us who have registered for them. But at any rate, I watched first, I believe, one done by young people. I'm very interested in the younger generation. They're taking our place. They need to take our place. And so I was watching one about raising up the next generation. There were three fairly young men. From my perspective, everybody's young. But anyway, they were fairly young men who had been campus ministers. Some may have still been, but they worked a lot with campus. And I remember watching them talk about raising up young leaders. And Kevin Miller, who is the congregational evangelist in Boston now, I've known Kevin since he was a single guy many years ago when he was converted. But at any rate, he talked about raising people up, but he talked about raising up people you convert. And so he told a lot about the campus ministry at Boston, and as he talked about it, he wasn't talking like many people are today about what we ought to be doing. He was talking about what they were flat out doing at the time. And he had a couple of young people that had been converted come up and share. And man, they were dynamite. It was so convicting. It reminded me of my early experience with this movement that we now call the ICOC, the International Churches of Christ. But in the early days, it was basically kind of a campus ministry group, more campus than anything. And the first event that I went to was in March of 1981. I went to the Rocky Mountain Evangelism Seminar. And it was my first time to attend anything like that. And I went to one of the classes. It was maybe a couple of hundred people in it. And so somewhere in that class, the speaker for the class said, if you've been baptized in the last 2 years, please stand up. And so many people stood up. Almost everyone stood up. They were all new converts. And I thought to myself, goodness, how in the world are they doing that? I was amazed at the youth involved and that so many people at the entire conference there, seminar, whatever it was called, there were so many people there that were young people, and I wanted to know, how are they doing that? But they had a focus that Jesus had. He tells it very clearly in Luke 19:10. He says, the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. And so he had a focus. He did a lot of things. He healed people. He raised the dead. He blessed people in many different ways, served people, fed the poor, all of that. But he always was focused on getting them ready to meet God. There is no greater act of service than helping people come to know God. I was inspired by watching that episode. I've been inspired by every story of conversion that I've heard. I mean, every one. They start off and they tell about it, and they tell about the person that reached out to them first. They tell about the person that studied with them. They tell about the person that baptized them. They tell about the people that led them to Christ. And it's always a miracle story, but it's because someone cared enough, had enough of a servant's heart to reach out to others with the gospel. We don't ever outgrow that. I still do it. I had someone over doing some work at the house recently, over at actually a little cottage that we have near a lake. I was there and some men came to work, and I got into a conversation with one of those worker guys before he could escape. He was about to leave. But I got him into a conversation, and I talked to him about God. And I said, I've got this little book called God, Are We Good? I said, if I give that to you, would you read it? And he said, I'll take a look at it. I said, no, I'm not going to give it to you if you're not going to read it. Are you going to read it? It's short. He said, how long is it? I said, it's real short. Shortest book I've ever written. He said, okay, I'll read it, and then I'll give it to my boss because he studies the Bible himself too. And so I gave him a copy of that. But I'm always looking for opportunities to share, because that is the greatest act of service you'll ever do for anyone. And honestly, I don't think we can call ourselves a servant if we don't have our hearts set on helping people come to Jesus. The apostles wanted to sit on the right and the left. They wanted to be great in God's kingdom. And Jesus said, okay, you be the servant of all, and you'll be great. But that's the only way to do it. You got to become like a little child, he said, and become a servant. And so guess what the service was that he wanted them to give to everyone in the world? The Great Commission. Go and make disciples of all nations and baptize them and teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And one of those things is to go and to teach and to baptize and make disciples. It all just keeps going and going and going. People are rather taken with a little statement that I have written in the front of every Bible that I buy. I heard it from an elder in a church many years ago, but he said profoundly, never give your life up for anything that death can take away. The only thing I know that death won't take away is your soul. if you're right with God. And death will not take away the souls of other people that you have helped get right with God. So servanthood has many aspects to it, many blessings that come with it for obeying Jesus and imitating Him and trying to be the best we can be at being a servant of all. But it all boils down to the fact that there are no greater ways to serve than reaching out to people and leading them to know Jesus. The greatest of all is the one that helps people know God. All right, we are in segment 2 of episode number 11. And we have back today for the second time my good friend Matthew Winter. And so he was with us a couple of weeks ago, back again today. Good to have you. You always have questions that aren't answerable by yes or no, which is good. That leads us into discussion. So anyway, great to have you back.
Glad to be back.
So what do you have on your mind with session number 11, or episode 11?
Yeah, let's get it started. This is kind of a small aside here. I think you had mentioned that you've only ever seen 2 types of leaders in your life. One is those who are harsh, and the other are those who are servants, or like.
I didn't mean to say that.
Or okay,
those are the ones you remember.
Yes. Okay. You only. I guess. Yeah. Maybe I'm misquoting. Those are the 2 types of leaders that you remember
the longest.
I remember the longest. Okay.
The in-between people you don't remember that long.
Yeah.
Because they didn't make an impact, a strong impact, good or bad, probably.
Okay. The question I was going to ask you, though, now that I understand you clear, I don't know if it applies as much. I was wondering what you thought the ratio was between the number of harsh leaders you remember versus the number of servant leaders you remember.
Well, in an earlier podcast, I talked about the old days, and I talked about, I think I did, the military model that we followed in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I'm sure I talked about that. And so I think there was a fairly high percentage of people that were much more of the harsh type, or certainly not, they certainly weren't on the servanthood end of it. But I've been blessed with a lot who were the servant type.
Yeah.
So I was more fortunate than a lot of people. When I went to Boston, we were together with the Shaws, Wyndham and Jeannie Shaw.
Yeah.
And Wyndham and I later wrote a book, Golden Rule Leadership, together, co-authored it. But Wyndham was never anything but a servant leader. He was awesome. And his family, I think bears that out very well. He was a servant guy. But I think the ratio was way too high in older days of people that tended to be harsh. I think we have probably some people today, I don't want to get into a ratio deal, but we have people that are not at either end of that extreme. They're not harsh, but they're not as far on the servanthood role as I would wish they were.
Yeah.
And probably there are people that say, yeah, Gordon, I wish you were further along that road too. So I'm not throwing stones, because they end up coming back.
Amen. Amen to that. Question I had for you along those lines, because I think it's very true, that we often only remember, they say that humans remember the beginning and the end of a story, but the middle's kind of muddled, so I think in a similar way, it's like we generally remember the extremes,
right?
And when things are mild, so I think that's very understandable. However, I think sometimes it can be a little bit more like complicated or nuanced, because, just in my personal experience, there are sometimes leaders who are harsh and a servant in some ways. And I guess my question is, I often find I trust that leaders have the best of intentions.
Mm-hmm.
So how does someone with the best of intentions end up being someone who's harsh?
Well, I think that could come from them being in a bad place at a given time. I mean, I think that happens. With all of us as individuals, we can be in a bad space and react in a way that we shouldn't. And then on the other end of it, the one who's under that person's leadership, they can be in a bad place and misinterpret what the person is doing. You know, that's the thing about God in the Old Testament that I've struggled with a lot, because there are times when he just seems harsh.
Mm.
But if you understand that he is the servant of all servants, then what he did was necessary, or he would not have done it. And he even said in one of the times I mentioned a passage where he said he takes no joy at all in discipline, but he does it for our good. So I think it can be either end.
Yeah, well, that's good stuff.
But I think all of us have to watch it, because there are times when we can do something a certain way, or we could even make a wrong judgment about, okay, today I need to really, quote, let the hammer down in my teaching, for example. And maybe that was not the right time to do it.
Yeah.
And then with such a mixed audience, I had a woman once after a sermon say she was going through a divorce. She said that just wasn't the lesson I needed. And I was going through the Gospel of Mark or something, just expository. And I said, I know that's not what you needed, but it's a big audience and there are a lot of people that did need it. So it is complicated. You said it was nuanced. And it is. Yeah.
As many things are, the answer is not always clear.
Yeah.
And sometimes, most often, dependent on the situation at hand.
Right. Good.
And so I think, on that note, how would you suggest that people, say I do need to have a one-on-one conversation with someone,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm making a judgment of whether I need to be, speak softly but carry a big stick, or just be,
more challenging.
Exactly. Yeah. How would you suggest that someone makes that distinction? Because I think, if I could go into it with the same heart, but maybe not have the right tact or the right approach, and could really hurt someone. So how do you think Jesus walked that line, and how do you think we should walk that line based on that?
Well, he walked that line because he knew exactly where everybody was and what they were thinking and all that. With us, a lot of prayer that the Holy Spirit would lead us. I pray a lot that the Holy Spirit will do a lot of things for me, but that's one of them, to help me approach a situation the right way. And that's one of the things. I'm thinking of situations that I've been involved in before. And sometimes the explanation in advance, I feel the need to have a serious talk, but I want it to come across the right way. I really do care. Some disclaimers going in can be helpful.
Yeah.
And then to say at the end, okay, so what are we thinking here? How are we feeling about this? So I think that's another thing that we can do as well. And then a lot of times after I've had one of those talks with people that is challenging, I'll actually call them the next day. And I learned that from someone. Call the next day and find out, okay, what's yesterday feel like today?
Yeah. I think one thing that is always, I felt very convicted about growing up was that people can't hear me unless they know that I love them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, that's more of a comment than a question.
Right.
But I think it just reminded me that just when we go into things with an agenda and not with love, I think people can tell.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like my wife has this thing she calls the love sandwich. And she said that Paul, in almost all of his letters, even letter to Corinth or whatever, he has the bread is complimentary, positive, encouraging, all of that. and then you have the rest of the sandwich, and then the bread on the other side as you come back and finish that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you start in a very positive, upbuilding way, then you share the serious stuff, and then you come back and top it off with encouragement again.
Yeah. I think that is something I feel very strong about too, is that, projecting positive vision onto people is way more impactful than, just criticism. I often tell people, what if Jesus had just, what if God let Jesus come down to earth and just to let us know, hey, by the way, your sin has doomed you. And I'm like, well, that wouldn't be very fun, would it?
Yeah. What I've thought about a lot is the apostles. I mean, Jesus knew every thought they had. And if he had wanted to, he could have constantly been pointing out every wrong thought they had. I mean, that would have been a horrible nightmare. No one would have followed him. But he didn't do that. He was very strategic and waited till the moment was needed before he ever got on the heavy side with them.
Yeah.
And the rest of the time, they loved being with him. There was something about him that drew them. So there's a lesson in that one. Too much critique does a lot of damage.
Especially without that positive vision.
Right.
I heard you say that you had you hadn't attended the conference in Florida.
Right.
But you had listened to one of the lessons. What did you think of it?
The one I mentioned about Kevin Miller, and there were actually two other guys on, and then some campus students, I think, that spoke. But I thought it was fantastic, because a lot of times we talk about the old days when campus ministry seemed to just work a lot easier and a lot more effectively. And we say, well, people are different now, society's different now, the things that worked back then won't work now. But basically what Kevin described is they're doing at places like Harvard and MIT the same things that they were doing when I moved to Boston in 1988. But I'm sure they've tweaked it enough to make it still work. That's what I think. But the main thing is there are people that are open.
Yeah.
But if we don't talk to them, we're not going to find out.
Yep.
And there are a lot of ways to develop the conversations, develop relationships that lead to conversations. It doesn't have to be all of what we call cold contact, but we do have to open our mouth.
Yeah. I was saying I actually got to go to the lesson that you referred to with Kevin Miller and the other two speakers, Jameson Malcolm and J. Brian Craig. Yeah. And I love what they had to say. I think the title of the session was more or less like raising the next generation.
Right.
And I think that idea was very intriguing to me, because this was a lesson for church leaders. I kind of stepped in there a little bit. I was supposed to be in the campus track or the singles track, but I was really intrigued. I was like, how do older generations think they should raise the younger generations?
Right.
I think that's a very intriguing idea to me. I think, and I've seen a lot of, obviously there's always a lot of young people that butt heads with different generations.
Right.
And I even think back to the history of our church and history of the International Church of Christ. Part of us breaking off was disagreements between generations and, having more zeal, having more discipleship, having more evangelism, and, opening our mouths to other people. And I think sometimes I feel like it comes full circle, and, I'm starting to see, I'm like, I wonder if this is what it was like. And I'm like, is this what it was like 40 years ago or something, or however many years ago? Yeah. And I was wondering what advice you would give both to older and younger generations on, hearing each other out and working together to address changing generations, changing cultural and social context.
Well, I think that's the main thing, is we have to talk, but we have to be willing to change. And I was one of the older guys that was willing to change, because I saw the effects of what was going on, the effectiveness of converting a lot of people. And I was willing to change and learn, but I had a lot of close friends that tried it and left. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to make those changes. And to me, change is positive. To some people with an old mindset, I don't care how old they are chronologically, they have an old mindset and they don't like change. How can you not like change if you follow Jesus? Because we're supposed to become like him, and I've got to be constantly changing till the day I die. I'm always on the change. But some people, it's a negative word. For me, it's one of the most positive words in the English language. I get to change. I'm not stuck with me the rest of my life. But anyway, it's great to be with you, and you got a lot of good thinking going on there, Matthew. God's going to use you.
Thanks for having me.